Hello and welcome to One SDSU podcast. I'm your co-host Andrea Van Bever.
And I'm your co-host, Angela Manza. And today we inaugurate our very first One SDSU podcast episode. To briefly introduce the initiative of One SDSU podcast, we hope to achieve different variables throughout the project, which are to create unity within students and campuses, empower diversity and ethnic backgrounds, and encourage podcast creation to all.
With that being said, let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. I'm in my first years of the Masters in Social Work here at SDSU Imperial Valley, and I'm a graduate assistant for the Cross-Cultural Center, which is the home base of this podcast.
Hello everyone, I am currently a senior at SDSU Imperial Valley, majoring in public administration and one of the founders of the One SDSU podcast project.
We would like to welcome Dr. Pamela Lack as our first guest of the podcast. She's the director of the library's Digital Humanities Center from San Diego State University in main campus. She will give us a workshop on the basis of podcasting.
Welcome, Pam.
I have put some links in chat and I'll just put them in one more time. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started.
Great.
Okay, sorry. Hopefully you're seeing slides.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm super excited to be working with Imperial Valley to bring podcasting out to where y'all are. This is the first of a two-part, very kind of condensed workshop that we've been running here off and on since 2019 or 2020. And I put the link in chat, the tinyurl.com, which takes you to a Google Drive folder. Actually, let me go into that folder real quick. Sorry. It takes you into a folder with all of our podcasting resources. The full 5-part slides are here, but this folder here, the condensed version, has all the slides for these two workshops. We also have tip sheets and tutorials, sample audio to play with, and some overview resources. So with that, I'm going to go and get started. And I would add that the QR code that I put in, if you have a phone handy, will take you to that folder with all of those links. I'll start with our land acknowledgement for San Diego State and Imperial Valley. For millennia, the Kumeyaay, Kuchan, and Kukupa people have been a part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the San Diego State community, we acknowledge this legacy. We promote this balance and harmony. We find inspiration from this land, the land of the Kumeyaay, Kuchan, and Kukupa. I also want to acknowledge that this workshop wouldn't be possible without Zoom, which is headquartered on the traditional lands of the Muwekma Ohlone and Tamiya Nation in what we now call San Jose. This technology allows us to connect across vast distances, but it is not without invisible costs, both in terms of human labor and environmental impact. And I would also add that a land acknowledgement is a start. It's the beginning of a conversation and a call to action. It is not a replacement for action. It is not in and of itself enough to repair the historical and ongoing damages we have done. So again, as a reminder, all of the resources we have are available through that QR code and that tiny URL. All the slides, our tip sheets, we have training videos, mini tutorials, and sample audio, as well as some overview resources. And those will remain well beyond this workshop. So you can always bookmark it or download the content, whatever you want to do, and it's always available for reuse. Okay, what we're going to be doing today. I'm going to start by talking a little bit very broadly about what is podcasting, what it is, what you need, what the podcast creation lifecycle looks like. We're also going to take a few minutes to look at copyright because that's really important in the world of audio. And then we'll do some demoing of how to record audio, both by yourself and with others. I won't be able to demo recording with others today, but I'll talk about it. If you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat whenever you have a question occurs to you. I'll be looking at the chat, as will my colleague Patrick. Or you can raise your hand if you're comfortable doing that and ask your question. So with that, I'm going to dive in. I want to just start with a really brief introduction to digital humanities here at San Diego State. I am in the Digital Humanities Center, which is in the SDSU library here in the San Diego campus. And it is the home of our interdisciplinary digital humanities initiative. Our community takes a critical stance towards digital technology, focusing its work on equity, diversity, inclusion, and social justice. As the hub of that work, our DH Center supports anti-racist and anti-oppressive research, teaching, and learning that values the importance of the humanities and the interactions of humans in real time and space in the digital age. And even though most of you are out in Imperial Valley, you are still part of our community, and we invite you to connect with us remotely or in person if you're in town, through face-to-face, hybrid, and virtual events, our YouTube channel of past events, and a whole range of tool tutorials, one-on-one consultations with myself or Patrick, as well as instruction and pedagogical support, and just general community building. You are part of our family. And with that, we'll talk about podcasting. So what is a podcast? Simply put, a podcast is a digital audio file that is hosted online somewhere that people download and listen to. Typically, people will listen through podcasting apps, but you can also listen through your web browser. When we refer to a podcast, we talk about it as both a show and an episode or of a show. So sometimes we refer to the entire podcast as the podcast, the whole season, or an individual episode. Most typically, podcasts are free. There are subscription models out there, particularly for folks who are looking to raise money through Patreon or something like that. And generally what happens is people upload their podcast episodes to some sort of service that pushes out to everybody's device. So wherever people listen to podcasts, if you're using one of those platforms, they'll get your podcast if they subscribe. Podcasting is... Oh, sorry, is there a question? You might want to go ahead and mute yourself because there was a little bit of feedback there. Awesome. Podcasting is wildly popular right now. There's no exact number of how many podcasts are out there, but some people have estimated as few as 176,000 episodes to 850,000. Any way you slice it, it's a lot of podcasts. It's really popular. And part of that is because it's a very accessible technology, both to listen to and to create. And there are ways that you can make podcasts even more accessible for people who need assistance with or who are hearing impaired. Podcasting embraces do-it-yourself kind of ethos, which was really important during the height of COVID, when we were all at home and we didn't have access to fancy technology. It's also an incredibly intimate technology, and it feels very personal because most people tend to listen to podcasts with headphones on or with earbuds in. And so sound is actually like coming into your body, and you feel a very personal connection. And as you start listening to podcasts, you begin to build a relationship up with the host if you listen regularly. So it feels very personal. And I think especially during the height of the pandemic, people really craved that kind of personal connection. It's also incredibly visual. So even though it's an audio medium, with the combination of language, words, voice, sound, music, you can build a really rich visual landscape and create a very immersive experience for listeners. There's a whole range of types of podcasts. And generally here at the DH Center, we focus on scholarly and pedagogical podcasts. But there's also fictional podcasts, comedy ones, sports ones just for fun. Really, you name it, there's a style out there. For those looking to do more scholarly podcasting, there's sort of the common ones are sort of the monologue where a person gives a lecture, or an interview style, or a panel style, or a little bit more of a documentary approach where you have narrated audio. You bring guests in, you tell a story, but it's a story that's shaped by your expertise. One of the great things about podcasting is that it's so accessible. You don't need a lot to do it. You need some kind of microphone, and even if you don't have a fancy one, you can still make a podcast. You need a computer, some place to record, and you can create a really awesome recording studio wherever you are with just a few props. You need some kind of software, and then you need a place to put your podcast, typically a hosting service. Most importantly, you need ideas, you need energy, time, and you need community. So before we dive into some of the technical aspects, I'll just talk a little bit about ways of thinking about getting started and planning and introduce you to that life cycle. So there's several steps involved in creating a podcast, from your original idea to publishing an episode or an entire season. So most of that maps to what we would call the digital project lifecycle, which is actually not very different from the life cycle of creating anything, whether it's a paper for a class or let's say you're a crafter and you're creating a craft project. All of these projects involve some sort of planning phase, a phase where you're actually designing and creating the thing. So in our case, we would engage in whatever research we need to do, whatever scripting and storyboarding. Then you would record all your audio, and then you would engage in your editing, your mixing, post-production. We're going to talk about that at the second workshop. And then you would gather all the materials you need to publish your transcript for accessibility, cover art, show notes. It's a good idea to have a trailer to build up excitement for your season. And then you would publish it to a platform. There are free platforms out there. And so you don't need funding to host and push out a podcast to the world. But there are also paid plans that have additional features, including video features for those who want to add video components into their podcasting. We actually here in the Digital Humanities Center bought a subscription to rss.com, and we are now hosting individual podcasts. So we have 2 already hosted, 3 more that are joining us, I think, in the coming weeks or months. And Patrick's been overseeing our efforts to set up a hosting service, and can certainly answer any questions you have about that when you're ready to publish. There's also really fantastic how-to guides to help get you started. There's this wonderful guide to academic podcasting. Hannah McGregor is a leader in scholarly podcasting and has been building infrastructure to make scholarly podcasting count for tenure and promotion for those faculty who are watching this video. There's also podcasts about how to get started and how to plan a podcast, and then also just podcasts about making stories. So if you're really interested in exploring story making, story creation, Out on the Wire is a great podcast for you. But wherever you are in your process, if you've already got an idea or if you're just toying with the idea of a podcast, there's a few things you want to identify early in the process and remind yourselves of throughout the podcast process. Why do you want to do this? What is your motivation? What are your set of goals and values? Who are you doing it for? You might have an intended audience, but there might also be an unintended audience as well. What's it going to be about, and what kind or type or style of podcast are you going to have? And that's a really important thing to know as you're getting started. How are you going to do it? How are you going to weigh in all of the things you're juggling, your time, other demands on your attention, your labor? If you're working with a team, how are you going to divide that labor? How are you going to do it equitably and build accountability systems? And then where's it going to fit in your broader identity, whether it's your scholarly identity or your social media identity or some other kind of identity? How does it fit in? Is it just this one-off thing that you don't really, it's sort of separate from who you are from the day-to-day, or is it going to be fully integrated? So thinking about that as well. When you're ready to dive in and you have an idea and you're planning an episode or a season, storyboarding is a really great approach. If you think about it, it's sort of like panels of a comic or a cartoon or a wireframe, and it helps you pace out episode segments, determine narrative arc, mood, things like that. You can do very basic storyboarding just with pen and paper. You don't need to use a fancy tool. But it's also a good thing to do if you're planning an entire season to build a template. And this is an example of one where you have sort of a set template, and then you know each episode is roughly going to follow that template. You're going to have a little intro story, you're going to have a little introduction, it's going to last 2 minutes, you're going to do an interlude, then you're going to do the first segment, it's going to be 10 minutes, whatever it is you're going to do. It can help you be more consistent, which will help in planning, recording, and then editing the podcast. Again, you can just draw, you can just sketch, and I always encourage folks just to use pen and paper and then take a photo of your sketch. But if you want to explore tools, there are lots of tools out there you can use, including Storyboarder, Miro, which is a collaborative whiteboard platform, Padlet, which I use a lot, or even a Jamboard. Or you can just use a plain old Google Doc or Word doc, whatever you've got. You don't need to use any fancy tool to sketch out your ideas. In digital humanities, we talk about a concept of backward design, which is similar to reverse engineering. So what you want to do is figure out what is it you're trying to do and how are you going to get there. So you figure out your endpoint and then you work your way back. There's a really great example that Miriam Posner has created called How Did They Make That?, where she has people deconstruct their digital projects to help us figure out how we can create similar projects. Basically, the goal here is figure out what your end goals are. Are you going to do a limited season of 4 episodes? Are you going to do just 3 seasons of each with 10 episodes? Whatever that is. Figure out how to break those goals into manageable pieces and what those milestones are going to be. So if you want to have a limited series podcast, 4 episodes, thinking about, having them all ready to go by the time that you publish so that you can release them all at the same time versus you want to publish in chunks of, you want to drop a podcast every week or something like that. Thinking about too, if you are planning a season or multiple seasons, how much do you want? How frequently do you want them to drop? How much do you want to have done before you launch? You always want to have some in the bank before you launch. You don't want to have to promise a weekly publishing schedule and then be editing in real time. That would be really hard to keep up with. And I always encourage folks to scale back and start small. So if you're new to this and you want to do a full season, maybe you just start with a mini season just to get your feet wet and get comfortable with the technology. I always encourage folks to focus on that big picture, focus on your values, your goals, your purpose, your audience, the thing that your podcast is about. You don't want to lose sight of that. And then think about what you absolutely need, what's essential for that podcast, and what would be nice to include if you had the time, and then give yourself permission to park that optional stuff over to the side and be okay with letting it go if you don't have time. And in this way, it doesn't become overwhelming and you can keep it more manageable. And again, we always encourage folks to start small and scale up when you're ready, if it's appropriate. And I would also say that small is good. It doesn't, you can do a small limited series podcast for a niche audience. And that's a wonderful thing and a great contribution. We don't all need to have, 10,000 listeners within the first week of launching a podcast. If that's your goal, that's fantastic, but it's okay to aim small here. Okay, just a few minutes about some copyright considerations. Just because I would be a bad librarian if I wasn't talking about copyright. I'll also add that I'm not a copyright expert and I'm not a lawyer, so this does not represent legal advice or anything like that. But copyright is really important in the world of podcasting. Any sound that you use has to be in the public domain or available for use. So it can be original audio that you and your team create. It can be audio that is royalty-free that people have put out for other people to use using what we call a Creative Commons license. Or if it's licensed audio, that it's audio that you've legally purchased through licensing fees and royalties. And if you have funds, you can buy you can buy copyrighted music libraries and things like that. But there's a lot of free stuff out there that so you don't have to spend money on this. Some of you may have heard of the concept of fair use. And fair use may apply to your podcast depending on a variety of factors. There's never any guarantees. For those of you who are new to the world of fair use, as best as I understand it, there are 4 pillars of fair use. One speaks to the purpose and character of the use, which is to say, if you are using it in non-commercial, nonprofit, or educational contexts, that's covered under fair use. The nature of the copyrighted work. So are you going to the very nature and core of that copyrighted work? The amount and substantiality of the portion that you're using in relation to the entire thing. So if you're sampling some music, how much are you sampling? And the effect of your use on the potential market value of the copyrighted work. So if you're hurting the copyright holder's ability to make money, that's a problem. So again, I cannot provide legal advice on this. It's sort of up to you to figure out. So whenever possible, you want to use music that's royalty-free, sound effects that are royalty-free, or create your own. And with people often ask us about news clips and other kinds of things. Again, it's a little tricky. We find that there are some news clips that are produced through, say, public television or public radio that tend to be reusable versus things produced on networks or on cable where you might run into some trouble. It's always tricky. It's always murky. One of the beautiful things, though, about podcasting is even after you publish your podcast, if there's a problem with some of the audio you've used, if you accidentally violate someone's copyright, you can go back to your file, remove that sound, republish the file, and it's easy enough to push out the new version without any issues there. This slide takes you to a lot of resources for getting free sounds. Many of these require you to create a free account. And I just want to point out one thing because this comes up from time to time. The Free Music Archive, which I use a lot, you want to be very careful to not use the pro version because this is where they're going to charge you. The Free Music Archive, the free one, once you sign in, you can search for different genres. So let's say you want to look for blues and music about, I don't know, trains. Well, that's probably too specific. Let's try a different one instead. Actually, sometimes I just look for a genre and you can listen. And if you like something, you can actually download it. So for instance, if I like that, I would just download it. That's when I would have to log into my free account, which I'm not logged into. So I can't show you that right now. Okay. Whatever you do, wherever you go, you always want to make sure that you give credit. And I would add that if you are musical or musically inclined, or you have friends who are musicians, definitely ask to use their music, and then you'd want to promote their work. So you always want to give credit for any sound you use. And typically we would do this in the voiceover end credits and often in the episode show notes. So always make sure that you're crediting everyone who helped you and anywhere that you got any of the sound effects, music, anything like that that you used. Anything that you created yourself, obviously, you don't need to say, like, I created the interview, because we would know listening that you created the interview. Okay, let me pause there and see if there are any questions about anything before I proceed. Okay, I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to keep going. Get through all of this so we can actually get into recording today. Okay, what do you need? So you need some kind of microphone, and you can see that Andrea and Angela are actually using the same kind of microphone that I'm using. We're using the Blue Yeti. Let's see if I can show this, and I'll talk a little bit about this. So you need some kind of microphone, and if you don't have access to a professional microphone, you can use any kind. Back in the day when I was first getting started and we didn't have any actual microphones, I used just the microphone on my wired headphones. I just have to be careful because I'm a fidgeter, and so when I would fidget, you'd hear it like rustling against my clothing. And so I just have to be a little careful with that. If you are a gamer, you can use gaming headset. If you have access to a microphone, a more professional one, the Yeti is a really lovely and pretty easy to use entry-level microphone. And we have actually been graduating up to more professional microphones in our DH Center. You also need some sort of quiet place to record. If you have access to a recording studio where you are, that's great. Otherwise, I'll show you how you can create your own. Now, here in the library in San Diego, in our DH Center, we have 3 podcasting studios that are available Monday through Friday, 10 to 4 when classes are in session. So if you're in San Diego, you can always book these. We have 2 single-use studios. We call these sort of one and done. These are ideal for students who are creating very short podcasts as assignments. Often they're just reading from a script or doing an interview. They don't need anything particularly fancy. You'd bring your own laptop. Our microphones are USB, and so sometimes people need adapters for their laptops, but we have all of that as well. And then we have a really fancy studio with our Shure microphones that Patrick designed, and that's for more professional sound. We can have 4 people in the room, and we can Zoom people in and Bluetooth people in and create really professional sounding podcasts. Also here in our library, we have microphones available for checkout of varying quality. We're actually trying to check through all the equipment to make sure it's good. I'm not entirely sure what's available at Imperial Valley. I tried looking on your library website yesterday and I was having trouble finding anything, but I know that your fantastic librarian, Marikota, is working on creating a podcast studio in your library as well, and we're actually working with her to support that. So if it isn't there yet, I think at some point it will be. Again, if you're here in San Diego, you can always use our studios. They're available for anyone with an SDSU email. We don't differentiate between the campuses, but you might not want to drive all the way out here just to use the studio. So it's always available to you if you're here, but you can always record wherever you are. So if you don't have access to a studio, you can create your own. And this was actually something that people figured out really quickly in the pandemic. You can create a good sound dampening environment. And by sound dampening, I mean you want a space where your voice isn't going to reverberate back and forth. So if you're in a really big cavernous room with tall ceilings and not a lot of stuff on the walls or hardwood floors, it's going to create an echo. The goal for us is to minimize that. So what we want to do is use a smaller recording space, make it enclosed. So I'm in a fairly small office and there's some stuff on the wall. And then we can produce sound dampening. So actually during the pandemic, a lot of people recorded in their closets. And if you have a big enough closet, it's an ideal space to record because all of the clothing that you have hanging up produces a natural sound dampening effect. So if you're lucky enough to have a walk-in closet and you can put a chair in there and record comfortably, that's a great thing to do. Other people will use props. So for instance, I forgot to get my blanket out, but pretend this is a blanket. If you take a blanket and sort of put it over, let's say you have it draped between a desk and a chair and you sit underneath it with your microphone, it actually will produce a bit of a dampening effect. We teach a National Podcasting Institute twice a year with the National Humanities Center. And we had one a couple weeks ago, and we had a participant who was in a very echoey apartment and didn't really have a good space to record and couldn't sit comfortably on the floor. So she took, I can't believe she did this, but she took her mattress, she took it off her bed, put it up behind her as like a sound barrier, and the chain, and then she took the couch cushions and put them around her. And just doing that made for an incredibly improved sound sort of home studio. Some people like to record in their car. If you do that, you'll want to similarly have some pillows and blankets and things like that just to dampen that sound and make sure that you're parked in a fairly quiet place. So if you're on a busy street, it's not going to be a great space to record in. If you can't control the recording environment, so if there's background noise and ambient noise, there's other things you can do, including capturing some of the background noise while you're recording and then stripping that out when you go to edit. We won't talk about that today, but I will talk about that in the second workshop. So once you've got a space to record and something to record with, you need something to record to. So you're going to need some kind of software. And there's all kinds of software out there. We use Audacity here in the DH Center. It's free to download. You can use it on Mac and PC. You can also use the Adobe Creative Cloud products, Adobe Audition, which we all have access to through our SDSU ID. I don't like to use it's hard to say, Adobe Audition, because it's expensive. It's a little bit harder to learn, and then once you graduate, you lose access to it. So we always start with Audacity. If you are a Mac user, you can also use GarageBand if you've been using GarageBand. If you're a Chromebook user, it's a little bit more challenging because Chromebooks you can't really install software onto a Chromebook. There are browser-based tools you can use to record. And actually, we usually recommend that for recording purposes, people in Chromebooks, if they can't get access to a loaner laptop, they could just record in Zoom to the cloud and produce their audio file in Zoom and then bring it into audio software. It's a little bit different when you're trying to capture multiple voices in the same recording session, and I'll talk about that at the end with whatever time we have left. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about microphones. Now, I'm going to be demoing the Yeti, but some of you might have access to other microphones, so I'll sort of expand out from the Yeti in just a little bit. The Yeti is a really good entry-level, what we call a multi-pattern microphone for recording. It's also good for gaming and streaming. It's a USB connection. So what that means is it connects from a USB. It's got a USB sort of port on the bottom, or an adapter that goes into USB. If your computer is more recent, older computers have USB ports. Newer ones have what's called USB-C. And that might require you to use an adapter like this one. So this has the USB to I don't know if you can see it, to the USB-C. Sometimes we see a little trouble with adapters. So if you're trying to get set up and you're having trouble, it might be the adapter. We can always advise on that. There's a couple features of the Yeti. On the front, first of all, it's got, and I apologize, you're going to hear me picking it up and down. It's going to make a little noise. It's got a nice heavy stand here to keep it stable. That's really important when you're recording. It has a mute button on the front. When it's solid red, sorry, you can't hear me. When it's solid red, that means it's recording. If I turn it to blinking, so even though I didn't mute myself in Zoom, because I hit that button, I muted myself. This is the number one issue we see with recording is people will accidentally mute their microphone, not realize it, and then not capture their sound. If you want to use headphones, you can plug them into the base of the Yeti. And what that does is it lets you hear yourself through the microphone, and you can really hear every little thing in your voice. I find that distracting, so I tend not to do that. If it's distracting, you can always turn down the volume on the headphones. And then on the back, we have two important features, what we call the gain knob, which is used to adjust your mic sensitivity to sound. And so depending on how close you are to the microphone or how far away you are, and how your gain is set, it's going to change the quality of your voice. So as I go closer, my voice is going to change. You might not hear this as much in Zoom because Zoom does some sound dampening, but you will hear it when you're recording. We like to start with the gain straight up in the 12 o'clock position, and then we adjust from there based on our position, how close we are to the microphone, how much sound we're getting. And then there's the mic pattern. So with this particular microphone, there's 4 settings. There's the cardioid, if it's just you. There's the stereo mode, omnidirectional, and the bidirectional. So bidirectional would be if you're interviewing someone and you're sitting on either side of the Yeti. Now, the important thing is how to position your microphone. You want to position it so you're in a natural position. You want to be comfortable when you're recording. And you'll see that some podcasters will record standing up, and your voice will sound different if you're sitting versus standing. I've been experimenting with that, and I definitely have a different sound when I record standing versus sitting. And so you want to figure out how you're going to be comfortable. I mean, if you're going to do an hour-long interview, standing might be a little too difficult. So you want to make sure that you're comfortable and then position the mic based on your comfort. So it's important that you keep your face sort of facing the microphone. We were recording a podcast a few weeks ago where we had the mic perfectly positioned, and then the host kept looking away, and we kept missing what he was saying. So he kept, whenever he looked at the mic, we got his voice perfectly, and then when he looked away, we couldn't really hear him very well. So you want to make sure that you're positioned with the mic in a good spot, and then recognize that the mic is very sensitive and picks up everything. So if you are a fidgeter like I am, it will pick up everything. When you're tapping your nails, or if you're, nervously tapping your foot, I sometimes have to record sitting on my hands. And if I'm reading from a script, I actually tape the script to the table so you don't hear the paper shuffling. So you just want to be mindful of that. You also want to make sure that if you've got your device with you, whether it's a laptop or a phone, that you silence your notifications, any emails coming in, anything like that, because that will all get picked up as well. Now, it's really important that you understand how your microphone functions so that you know how to position it. With the Yeti sits at a straight up at a 90-degree angle, or just straight up, I guess. My geometry is so bad, I can't remember now. Because what you want to do is speak into the front right here. Sorry, you can't see it with my virtual background. Sometimes you'll see in TV, people have the microphone angled. And for some microphones, that's how you speak into it. For the Yeti, it's the front. So you need to know how your microphone functions. Our higher end microphones, we speak into the end of them, so we angle them down. So again, it's going to depend. So you need to know what kind of microphone you're using so that you know how to position it. And then you need to know how to configure it, which I'll show in just a moment. Then you need to make sure that your software is actually picking up your audio, your microphone. We've had people record podcasts where their microphone is plugged in, but they didn't adjust their settings, so their recording didn't pick up through their good microphone. It went through their laptop. And the sound quality is going to be better through an external microphone. And then you want to make sure that your sound levels are good. The goal is to get the strongest, best capture you can so that you don't have to do as much editing of the sort of quality of the sound, and that you can focus your editing on editing out when you cough or when you flub something and you start over. Now, it's really, really important, particularly for Mac users, but really for everybody. You want to plug everything in before you launch your software. So you want to have your microphone plugged in. If you're using headphones, you want to have those plugged in as well. If you launch software and then plug in, you might have problems. You might crash your system. Okay, a couple more things, and then I'm going to dive into recording. No matter how new or seasoned you are to podcasting, you always want to do a test every time, start to finish, because even if you haven't changed any of your settings, something can always change if you've updated your operating system or something like that. You always want to check what's called your inputs and outputs, your sound levels. You want to know where you're saving your files and that you have sufficient storage, and you want to make sure that everything's working. You also want to make sure that you give yourself and your guests time to get comfortable. You want time to warm up while recording. I have been teaching podcasting for years. The first time I went into our professional studio to record, I was feeling really comfortable. And then the minute we hit record, I froze up and I panicked. So what you want to do is just start recording, chat, get comfortable. And then once you're ready, you can actually start recording for real. And you can always edit out the intro stuff or the stuff that you recorded while trying to get comfortable. It can take a while. And if you're recording with someone who's nervous, it will make you more nervous. So here, my colleague EJ, sitting in the left of the image, she was really nervous and she was making me really nervous. So I froze up even more at the beginning of the recording session to the point where I could barely remember my name when it was my turn to introduce myself. So just give yourself time to get comfortable while recording. Okay. I'm going to mostly just show you how to record on your own. There's lots of tips and tricks out there, and the link to this tip sheet shows you a little bit more than what I'm going to have time for today. So again, we're going to be using Audacity. You can use whatever you've got, and if you're in a real pinch, you can also use your phone. The quality of what you will get on your phone versus a professional mic will differ. Some of that we can correct in post-production. I'm going to skip over this and show you this live. Okay, and then I'll show you this as well. When you're done recording, I'll walk you through what you're going to do. This is just a slide that you can refer back to down the road, and I will cover this again in the second workshop. I'll come back to this in just a moment. Okay, I'm going to go out of my slides, and I'm going to open up Audacity. This is my Audacity window. And can everybody see that? Cool, thank you. So when you first launch Audacity, it might look a little bit different depending on how you've configured it. You can move things around. Let me get my mouse out. So for instance, I have a particular setup that I really like. And so I'm going to just sort of drag my little toolbars around to where I like to have them. I've trained my eyes to know where to see things. Now, the first step in Audacity is that we have to set up our audio right here. What I'm going to actually do to make this a little bit easier is I'm going to go up to my view menu, and I'll cover this more next week as well. I'm going to turn on my device toolbar so I can have a better look at what I'm doing. If you're a Windows user, this is going to look a little bit different, so it's going to depend on your setup. But what I'm going to do is say, either by going through my audio setup, I want to record with my Yeti. If you're not using an external microphone or you're using a different microphone, you would pick the one you want. I want to record in stereo rather than mono for a richer sound. And I want to, and then I have to figure out what we call our playback devices or our headphones. And this is the speaker icon. Now here's where it gets a little complicated. If I had headphones plugged into my Yeti, I would choose the Yeti microphone as my playback device because my headphones are running through my Yeti. If I were not using headphones and I were on a Windows PC, I could just keep it to my built-in speakers, I think. But because I'm Mac and I'm on Zoom, I'm going to be running my playback through Zoom so y'all can hear what I hear. Okay, so that's going to be the one thing you have to play around with a little bit. And this is why we always want to do a test. Then what I'm going to do is just start to get some sound levels just to see how things are going. Let me make a little more room here. Okay. And that I'm going to use this red round circle button. That's the record button. And you'll notice that when I hover over, it tells me what each button is. Now, as I start to record, you're going to see a couple things. You're going to see here a recording monitor. This shows me the quality of my voice or my gain, and you'll see it's mostly green. If I get too close to my microphone, it's going to be red or very red or yellow. Now, the goal is to avoid that red and orange. A little bit of yellow is fine. So I'm too close to my microphone right now. I have to back off. You'll also notice that here you can sort of visually see when I speak. And this is called the waveform. This is the visual representation of the audio. And it's actually formed by sort of the amplitude. And that's about as technical as I can get talking about waveform. But there are two visual cues that my voice is getting picked up versus, let's say I'm muted and I start to record. Now I've unmuted my microphone and now it's recording. So if you are recording and it's playing, but you're getting that that means you're accidentally muted. And so that's a good visual cue. And that's one of the biggest mistakes we see when folks are getting started with podcasting. If I want to go back and listen, I can jump all the way to the beginning and then hit play. Now, as I start to record, can you hear that? You're going to see a couple things. You're going to see here a recording monitor. This shows me the quality of my voice or my gain, and you'll see it's mostly green. If I get too close to my microphone, it's going to be red or very red or yellow. Okay, so here is when I was way too close to my microphone, and you can hear a crackle or very red or yellow. Now the goal is it's a distortion that I can't edit out. So you want to use those visual cues to make sure your sound levels are good. So let's say I wanted to be closer to my microphone, I might need to lower my gain, or if I wanted to be further away from my microphone, I might want to raise it. And I just want to play for you what that sounds like. So here I am at my normal position. Here I am way too close. I've now turned up the gain and I'm still too close. And here I am with lower gain, a little further away, even further away. And we can take a listen to that. So here I am at my normal position. Here I am way too close. I've now turned up the gain and I'm still too close. And here I am with lower gain, a little further away, even further away. So again, depending on your position to the mic, what volume is your natural speaking volume, you're going to get a different kind of sound. If you see that you are crackling too much, you're going to want to back off. You're coming in too hot. So you're going to want to back off from the microphone a little bit or lower your gain if you're using a Yeti that has that setting. If you're using a microphone where you can't control that, then you need to think about your distance to the microphone. So now that I feel like I've got a pretty good sound, I'm going to actually do a quick recording. The important thing here is everything you do can be edited out. So if you make a mistake or you cough, you can pause, you can mute yourself, whatever you want to do, or you can deal with that in post-production. The trick is going to be to give yourself, to make it easy for you to record, to edit later. So if you have a false start or you need to try it again, what you're going to want to do is pause just enough so that you can find that spot and edit it out, and it's just going to be a lot easier. So what I'm going to do is read from a little excerpt of Principles of Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. I'm going to start with a little bit of silence to pick up any ambient noise in my space, since I'm not in a good recording space, and then I will start recording. Principles of Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. Let me start over. Principles of Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. Small is good, small is all. The large is a reflection of the small. Change is constant, be like water. There is always enough time for the right work. There is a conversation in the room that only these people at this moment can have. Find it. Never a failure, always a lesson. Trust the people. If you trust the people, they become trustworthy. Move at the speed of trust. Let me do that one again. Move at the speed of trust. Focus on critical connections more than critical mass. Build the resilience by building the relationships. Less prep, more presence. What you pay attention to grows. Okay, so rather than stop and start, I just kept it rolling, and I just know that I'm going to have to edit it out. And we can check and hear this. Principles of Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. Let me start over. Principles of Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. Small is good, small is all. And you'll notice that there's a playback meter here that mirrors the recording levels. So I can tell that I'm doing well. And wherever I've clicked my mouse, that's where the recording picks up. Small is good, small is all. The large is the large is a reflection of the small. Okay, so I have finished recording my first session, and now I need to do something with this because this is just an audio track. It is not a saved file. I'm going to really quickly go back to my slides to talk a little bit about what happens next. So there are two things to do at this point. If you're new to podcasting or working with audio, I highly recommend that the first thing you do is perform what we call an export action, to take that audio and save it, sort of the raw audio file, so that you have it as a backup. Then you can create what we call a workspace where you would do your editing. I'm not going to talk about that this time. That's going to be what we're going to focus on in the next session. The key difference here is that we're doing two different things. We want to create an audio file, either a WAV file or an MP3. Those are our most common audio files, versus a project space where we're going to do all of the editing. You can think about that as like a blank canvas where you would paint a painting, or I sometimes use a baking metaphor, and you can describe it as a kitchen where you have you'll bring in all your ingredients to bake something. That is not an audio file. It's a specific kind of file, what we call an AUP3, that can only be opened in Audacity. Adobe Audition has something similar. It's a different file format, but it's very similarly. So we have individual audio files that we bring into a project workspace to edit. And what we want to do is essentially create that audio file. So what I'm going to do first is go up to File and say that I want to export the audio. And I'm going to call it Ivy Podcasting Demo. I can, it's typically defaults to WAV, which is a larger file. I'm going to actually keep mine as an MP3 just to make it smaller. I'm going to tell it that I want to save it to my desktop. I have a little instruction folder. I'm going to put it there. I'm going to ignore this metadata button here. This is something I'll talk about at the next workshop. This is kind of important last step. I'm going to export it. Now, it looks like nothing has happened, and that's because I've saved this audio file separately here. Here is what I just created, that IV podcasting. It was supposed to be demo, and I mistyped it, so I need to edit that. And now I have just a plain old audio file. If I double click it, it's going to open in my default audio player, which for me is Apple Music. And Marie Brown. Small is good, small is. There's that audio file. This is still an sort of untitled Audacity window. So I'm going to actually go ahead and save it as that project, that canvas, just so you can see what this looks like. Oops. I'm going to save it with the right name this time. And here's what you're going to see is the difference. Here's that AUP3. And if I click it, let me exit out of here. It's going to automatically open up an Audacity. It is an Audacity specific file. I'm going to cover this again next week, so don't worry about that. And I'm just going to, I know we're about short on time, so I'm just going to really quickly say a couple things. We don't have time right now to talk about recording with others. I'll come back to this next time, but essentially there's lots of different ways of doing this. And our goal, the best type of recording we can get, is what we call a multi-track, where we isolate each speaker from each other so that if somebody coughs while someone else is speaking, we can just get rid of that cough without losing what the other person's saying. And then we can add in all of the layers of sound that we want. There's a couple different ways you can do this, and the way that we've been recommending lately is by using Zoom. And I don't have time to cover this now, but these slides will talk through that a little bit, and I will spend a little bit of time in the second workshop talking about that. how to configure your Zoom. Again, we don't have time right now. There are other tools out there as well, but I do want to be respectful of everybody's time. So just as a reminder, those links that we put in the chat, those will get you to all of the resources that you need. I also have a really like a 1-minute feedback form if anybody, if you can give us some feedback about how this went for you. And Patrick and I are available to help in any way that you need.
Okay, that was an awesome workshop, Pam, and I thought that we all really learned a lot. We thank you, Pam, for being the first guest on our podcast and your amazing introduction to podcasting.
Yes, I totally agree. Again, thank you, Pam. And I hope that we had more time to deep into the subject, but we have run out of time. So we will discuss it further on our next episode.
Please tune in next week on Friday, February 9th from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. for a podcasting, audio editing, and mixing workshop instructed by once more Pamela Lack.
Feel free to send your feedback on the following link in the chat below or to our email onesdsupodcast@gmail.com. Thank you all for tuning in to the One SDSU podcast.
You can check out our recording of this episode on our YouTube channel at One SDSU Podcast, as well as the live streaming from the Cross Cultural Center's Instagram. We'll see you on the next episode. I am your co-host Angela,
And I'm your co-host Andrea.
and we are
One
SDSU United.